create awareness about policy gaps around gender mainstreaming in policy planning, implementation, as well as monitoring and evaluation to ensure accountability and transparency of national resource allocations and utilization, especially the national budget. I think it's important whether the national budget is gender sensitive when it comes to the allocation. Experts are here. So quickly, the program is supposed to start at 9:30. I think we've already done breakfast. Also, we are going to do a very brief introductory statement, which is going to factor the chairperson's statement or the representative of OSPG. From there, we're going to talk about highlights of analysis, key findings and recommendations, questions and answers. We will have group work to identify the key priority for advocacy engagement and later, but I think Lala will be coming later. Lala, you will be here later, right? You will be doing a presentation. Okay, a discussion point, you have some pointers. Okay, so before we go, I would want to, I'm just the MC of this program, just to ensure that things are going as they should. Though I was ambushed by my brother, Mr. Jano. He always ambushed me. It's all right. Lara will be having a statement on behalf of the NDI because they supported this program, and the program is initiated by the Open Society Platform, the Gambia. Without much ado, I want to invite Mr. Janama to come on board and give his statement. Mr. Janama is the program manager of the Open Society Platform, the Gambia. A brother, we've worked together for so long, and I think he's, I can say, a champion of transparency and anti-corruption. And my name is Mohammed Ba. I'm a journalist and the president of the Gambia Press Union and a key partner to Open Society Platform. Mr. Jarama, you're welcome. Please, could you kindly join me in welcoming Mr. Jarama on the podium? Mr. Jarama.
All right. Thank you so much, Mohammed Esba. Thank you. You are always willing to be with us. First, I will say good morning to each and every one of you, especially from our partners from the government who are representing the ministries, from Ministry of Education, Agriculture, Health, Ministry of Justice, and other agencies across the government fraternity. Then we also recognize the presence of the representative of the Auditor General, whose office has always been with us doing this work. In addition, I would specifically too, recognize the presence of Auntie Tabu, who has been part and initiator of this program. She has been actively participating in our radio program with MSBA and others also. Then, in addition, I always say this, without media, we could not do this job. We need to have them on our side in order to do this business clean and tight. Besides that, I would like to appreciate the hard work of our team who have been working on this project, a difficult area for that matter, but however, I believe we are getting ground in order to push the idea that we are working around through the support of this, the donor. Before I will finally recognize the presence of NDI, who has been a fantastic partner in the last 18 months or so, since January 2021, when we start this idea about open governance partnership in the Gambia. But the program is more than that. It's a component of that particular program but they were very incredible in every sense to see that you give us the financial and the technical support that is needed to move this idea in this country, and then I believe we are doing very well. Then I would like to give them a round of applause for supporting this program. Then, besides that, I will say this event could not happen without these incredible people, all of you from different departments and agencies who are with us here, in order to see that we validate this particular document that has been, we have been partnering with our other colleagues in order to see that we look the national policies from the dimension in order to see that whether there is inclusion, participation, which are core to see that there is transparency and accountability. Then we also appreciate the effort of that team too, who have been working with us to see that we do this exercise. Then, without not wasting too much of your time, as I said, good morning to you all. I welcome you to this historic occasion in the sense that gender is remained to be a critical issue in our development programming. And then gender always has been a lip service in all senses, from the fact that from this analysis, it shows that it's a lip service in this country, even at international level. There are progressive gender policies, gender regulation, gender programming, but our resources being allocated and utilized in order to address this particular phenomenon. No. Then, Mr. Moderator, as I said, my role here is going to just to present a paper on behalf of my chairperson, who is all the way in Basse, in order to work on another strategic partnership with other people in URR in order to extend this program there. Then the statement reads, then we gathered here today to fulfill one of the key requirements of this project. This project is called Gambia OGP Accelerator Program. People who are not used to the name OGP, OGP is Open Government Partnership. This is an elite club of government that is having over 78 countries now that are working on open governance issues, and then this is called Open Government Partnership. The initiative started in 2011, and then 8 countries have initiated this, and then I will mention them later in this speech. Then with that, we believe that this will serve, with that, the review and analysis of these 5 key policies that included National Development Plan, the National Budget, the Procurement Authority Act, the Gender Policy, and others are fundamental and critical to our national development. Then, as I said, gender remains as a critical and important issue, strategic for that matter, that form the core of our physical accountability. Does it been taken seriously? We say no, because the analysis have been proven here. But the idea about this process is all about to come with a local solution and hybrid solutions that is either homegrown Gambia or we borrow it across Gambia in order to put them together and then to see that we have a better policy for Gambia also. Then in that, we found that we believe that this process is going to be, we can achieve this and then achieve our international commitments. Example, the 2030 SDG indicators and goals, the 2065 agenda for Africa, and other international commitments also. And then it's also part of the fabrica of the good government initiative that has started since January 2021, when 22 years of Jammeh has gone finally. In this respect, he continues to say that the occasion is designed to support the government. CSOs are partners in developmental government. We are not competing with government. We need to be there to support complement the effort of government. Then this is a concrete step to address some of the structural issues and policy gaps that have been existing in our governance system. Then without no other, we found that gender mainstreaming in policy design, implementation, and monitoring in the national development discourse is fundamental, and then we need to discuss it. Then by not making any mistake, the coalition of CSOs, as I said earlier, with the support of NDI, this coalition includes the media, and then I recognize the presence of Mr. Famara Jaune, who have just joined us from Bekanya, who was also very fundamental and a good partner in trying to implement this program. You welcome, my brother, to have you around. Then it's all aimed to educate the public about what good governance tools are: accountability, transparency, participation, inclusion, and others. These are fundamental. And then NDI has taken a bold step, come after a transition in this country to see how best they can work in this area. And I believe that we are progressing very well. Then I would like to say this briefly. As I said, the background of OGP, this was formed in 2011 by 11 countries that included United States, Brazil, India, Mexico, United Kingdom, and Southern Africa. And then, as I said, the idea is just to see that there is an open government. There is open government, there is transparency, there is accountability. Then with that, with the partnership with the CSO partners, we also came this idea in 2021, January, to test this mechanism in the Gambia. And then with the support of our partners, media, and others, when we are starting this program, I believe we are at 4 points, between 3 to 4 points. But with the support and contribution of everybody in this country, Gambia is 10 points now. We are 2 points away being qualified to seek a membership to be part of the OGP initiative. And then with that, we thank the partners and the donors and whoever has contributed in any way that to reach at that level. Though we don't say that we associated that one to be we credit to be belongs to us, but OGP, OSPD and partners, NDI and others, and then other people like the Media Foundation, the Media Coalition, that came with the access to information, the work of Gambia Participate and others in the accountability and transparency space, have all contributed to achieving that 6 points in the last 18 months or so. With that, I would love to give them a round of applause for moving to that 10 points also. Then, Mr. Moderator, without not taking too much of your time, I just want to conclude with this statement to say that we at OSPG and our colleagues that we once again want to call on the government. We are renewing our commitment, and we are calling on the government and the National Assembly in order to see that there is a law in place. The anti-corruption law is sitting at the National Assembly for almost going to now 2 years or so. We know there are challenges there, but the government should take it seriously because there are a lot of scandals that are happening, and then there is no law in order to hold these people to account, and then I believe that will be helpful also. In addition, the enacted law of the access to information, which remains to be fundamentally important in this work, also remain languishing in the selves in the government departments and ministries, and then it is not in operations also. We are calling on the government to see that how that law can be operationalized so that it can help in the work that we are doing. Then, in conclusions, I want to call on my brothers who are here working in this space. Famara is here, Gambia Participate is here, Tabu is here representing CSOs and other stuff like that. If you call on the government, I believe that we need to call on ourselves as another unit of development, that is the CSOs and media, to work hard and then to support the government in an endeavors like this in order to realize our dreams that we are looking forward. Then finally, I would love to welcome all of you, most especially the government partners, as I say, to discuss and interact and share knowledge on the issue that is very crucial to Gambian democracy and national development, which is gender and empowerment. On that note, I thank to welcome you, all of you, and then I'm sorry for this speak to be a little bit long, but this is what we have for you. Thanks a lot, and then enjoy your day.
Developmental actors should all join hands together towards developing this country. Yes, we have the access to information law. I think government should be very serious about this law. It's already a law. It will help government itself to manage its information and also build public trust between the government and the people. The anti-corruption bill, I think, is definitely is something else. I think the National Assembly should definitely fast track that bill. Unfortunately, into the laws of the National Assembly, if you have a new parliament, you cannot inherit bills. Yes. So what happened is government should retable all these bills that are pending. So it's, yeah, that's, I made a research. But let's see what is happening, whether it will be a continuation or so, or whether they will do an adjustment when it comes to their standing orders or so. So without much ado, I would want to invite Madam Lala. Lala is representative of the National Democratic Institute. They are the ones who supported this program. And I will also want to recognize Mr. Jauno Jaune, a brother, a senior colleague, and someone who is also part of this, the partners. Lala, you're welcome.
Basically, this exercise, what I have here is 20 slides presentation. And we will attempt to give highlights that we undertook. And the focus of the exercise was on we started with the gender policy as the overall overarching frame, and then focused on this current National Development Plan, which I'm sure all of you know is expiring this year. It was supposed to expire in 2021, but due to COVID, it was extended up to 2022. And we also looked at the Public Finance Act 2014, as well as the procurement. The finding was that the policy was weak in respect or due to the fact that it does not follow through with policy actions, nor did it make provisions for an implementation strategy for gender mainstreaming. Another finding or another issue to be highlighted is that monitoring and evaluation of gender policies remain a challenge. And under this current frame, what we find is that it lists overall monitoring indicators. However, it did not do deep dives. It's not linked to relevant, or it's not relevant, for measuring the parity objectives. So, in other words, in simple words, let me say that there was a very weak link between the policy priorities and the monitoring, evaluation, and accountability framework. Now, another thing that is worth reflecting on is that there was no provision for research and other analytical work to guide gender policy formulation in the country. And I think you will all agree with me that it's important that we flag something like that, given the importance of evidence-based policy making. And you can only generate evidence really by undertaking robust and rigorous research and data collection. So that was a missing gap that can be highlighted, and we can really discuss the way forward around it. Also, there is the need to highlight that having undertaken a review of legislations, regulations, and so forth, there were no provisions in the policy to create a harmonious policy framework for gender. And that is significant. It's a significant gap, given that we always like to portray gender as cross-cutting. Now, the thinking is there is a need to provide and make provisions for harmonization of policies across the board. And that is a gap that as a country we are grappling with. It's not unique to this sector alone. We have found out in our work that you have a lot of policies and acts that are conflicting with each other. We seem to be doing a lot of things in silo, and it's important that we highlight it and work together to improve the status. Now, having said that, what we thought was we could come up with what we call policy pointers. We don't want to use the word recommendations. That may be too strong. But with policy pointers, it serves as a catalyst, really, for us to reflect more, do more, undertake further inquiries, and be able to come up really with actionable actions. And one policy pointer is that in the next cycle of gender policy, there should be provisions for a strategy, a mainstreaming strategy or an action plan. Another pointer highlights the need for strong M&E frames, but not only M&E frames, but the capacity, because also as a country, we always like to, throw the capacity building card. But here we are not only joining the bandwagon, but we are also highlighting capacity for what? The what capacity of capacity discussion. And here what we are suggesting is we work to build capacity around M&E, the monitoring, because it's quite, and I'm happy to see a lot of veterans of gender work in this country. It's easier said than done, trust me. Gender is quite a very complex area, and monitoring it. When we go to the NDP, you would see the intricacies and, from the elements of debt, to revenue mobilization streams. We tend to think they are gender neutral, but you end up seeing that government gives with one hand and takes away with the other hand. So it's really quite complex. So the capacity to be able to go in there and track it and monitor it and have a whole accountability frame is quite important. And of course, I had earlier made the case for the need to provide for research, institutionalize the element of research to deliver evidence that will guide policy formulation, execution, and going forward. So that's the message we have around the gender policy. Again, as I said, we also looked at the Public Finance Act. It's quite an important act in the business of gender empowerment. It gives a lot of prescriptions, and it regulates how we, as a country, undertake the whole issue of public financial management. And here what we found out was that in the Public Finance Act, there are no provisions. Nothing is being said around gender equity. And the only consideration, and you can look it up, and we stand to be corrected, but the only consideration is that it was limited to the use of gender pronouns, he, she. Literally, those were the only considerations that were given, and it was specific, and it was in respect to office holders such as the minister and the permanent secretary. But that's where the discussion around gender stopped. And really, if we benchmark ourselves with other countries, you can see countries, and not even, we don't have to go outside the continent. In this continent, you will find out countries that have really done better in terms of their public finance management, including the Public Finance Act, to ensure that gender is mainstream and it's supported and it's strengthened. Policy pointers again. It's been proposed that the Act must mandate all sectors to plan and budget in a gender responsive manner. And as I said, in terms of benchmarking, we have countries where it's mandatory that, you know, when you do your budget, and for a lot of the public finance management processes, the minister in charge of finance issues a certificate first that you have ticked the gender boxes, you know, before you can move forward. So that's a conversation we can continue to have in this country on, and that's just one example on how we can strengthen the public finance governance system to ensure that it is strong and it supports gender. Another issue relates to impact assessments. I'm sure many of you are familiar with gender impact assessments, the need to undertake impact assessments. And here, in addition to the generic impact assessment, you know, because there are times that also we see we have allocation of resources and disbursements of resources that targets gender sensitive and gender responsive programs and activities. But then we do not do follow-ups to know what the impact is in terms of whether it really reached the people and the areas and the issues that it was supposed to address. And the impact assessments are not only post, but ex-ante assessments also, you know, to ensure that we can even do assessments before, so that we can project and know how will this impact. And this impact assessment, for example, is very critical when governments come up with their revenue generation streams. And what our analysis and our assessments have shown is that, for example, many of the streams for revenue streams for governments, from VAT to increasing on alcohol and all of those, we've always had ministers upon ministers, you know, they say, okay, and we all feel good and say, okay, oh, they have increased taxes on tobacco and so forth. But really it has an impact on it's not gender neutral. That's what the literature is showing. And this can be an opportunity for us to, you know, I hope we will catalyze further deep dives and examinations. But the literature and the evidence is showing that it's not gender neutral. So it's good we have that conversation before we take all these revenue measures to beef up government resources. So what we're again saying is, and specific to this presentation, what we're saying is there's need for impact assessments, and it should also include on-depth risks. And for our finance colleagues, we know we have what we call the country debt management strategy, and it can be an opportunity really for us to look at and do assessments on our debt. You know, before we take it and after we take it, you know, how is it impacting, especially women? Now, we go to, let's look at the Public Procurement Act. Here, some of the findings show that the principles around the Public Procurement Act, as it relates to gender, and gender-friendly procurement processes, is very weak. The Act does not have a definition of women-owned businesses. And that begs the question, if you really are serious and you want to support women and make sure that they have their own fair share in procurement. We all know, we don't even have to stray, the government, millions and billions of dollars it has at its transactions, its business dealings, from procurement, buying of cars to buying of furniture to travels and all of those. Government spends a lot of money, and all of it goes through procurement. And we have been very self-congratulatory as a country that we're trying to do, proper procurement, and it's ticking the boxes of transparency and accountability. But then, again, it's gender blind. It's not trying to create a balanced playing field in terms of how procurement is administered in this country. It's governed in this country. And the finding is, if you want to be quite serious on that, your first point of call would be to define women-owned, so that you have a common definition. So application is quite easy, and you know what you're doing. Women, we always hear local content, so we're using it, we're also borrowing the term and using it as, and putting it across as women content, woman content, and we find out that that is also weak, it's lacking. There are no provisions in the Act. We know for a lot of procurement activities in this country, you have provisions for local content. If it's international bidding and all of that, you'll say, okay, 25% of it is for local content. We need to get our local entrepreneurs, also having a piece of the cake. But we don't have provisions for women-owned businesses. Although we saw some very good thing happening during the COVID, where women-owned businesses were supported to provide, the supplies for the food distribution that was done. But we need more of those, really. And the best way is to institutionalize it within the governance system, so that the women don't have to beg for it. They don't have to, trade for it. It's institutionalized, and it's their right. There is also non-reference to the social and economic empowerment of women-owned businesses. There are no provisions also for women representation in the GPPA governance. They would say, Balanga Nenam Nefa. If the women are not around the table, how well can they articulate? I remember we had a very good-spirited conversation. I've never felt that bad, in a good way, when we had the consultations with the persons with disability, and they told us off. Oh boy, they did tell us off. And I can never forget that. But stop trying to plan for us. Stop trying to articulate for us. We need to be around the table. Don't think for us. So again, this comes to mind that procurement governance, you have a lot of boards and so forth, but what's the women representation? How much equally represented are women around those governance systems? Data, again, we come to the issue of data. The Act does not provisions or mandatory the element of gender disaggregated, making sure that, what the approvals, this number went to women and so forth. So that if you need to solve the issues, you need to have the data, so that, it's not speculation, it's not just what you feel and what you think, but it's supported by data. So there is need for data, disaggregated data, gender disaggregated data being institutionalized in the system or in the Procurement Act. ICT, we also found out, it's a weak area. It's something that the whole world is harnessing now. We saw how it ensured business continuity during COVID. And trust me, the risks to development are not going to reduce. For the whole past decade, we had all been talking about climate change. We felt it was the only risk. It was the only there's this word they use, the kid on the block. But trust me, it's changed now. nowadays, from COVID, I like to tell people that let's not just think COVID, let's think pandemic. Because COVID, yeah, but we are here in Mayborg, we are here in monkeypox, any pandemic, financial. The next risk to our development that can shut us down may be cybercrime. We all know our financial systems are, thanks to globalization, all linked. Some country wakes up and they shut down things. You and I, nothing will be transacted. So that is another risk, and so forth. So digitalization helps to ensure business continuity. When we all couldn't go to office during COVID, we worked from home, and digitalization played a huge part. So digitalization in procurement will tick the boxes. If we put it, institutionalize it in the act, it will not only tick the boxes around the operational bit, but also transparency. Because digitalization helps around access to information. It helps around transparency and accountability. So these are all conversations that we can have around the table. Since I'm going too slow, let me fasten up a little bit. So policy pointers and ambiguous definition must be of women-owned businesses, must be put in place. Quota dedicated to women-owned businesses. Provisions must be made for women to be represented in the boards and so forth, and committees. And yes, we come now to the NDP. So to remind you again, the policy, we've looked at the policy, we've looked at these two tools that support, really, they are key in the public finance process. The budget and procurement, they are quite key. So we've looked at those with the gender lens. But in terms of the specifics, really, much of it is contained in the NDP, because these are generic frames that they're with us throughout. But the NDP is one good indicator of how we as a country want to engage and promote gender equality, the gender equality agenda. And when we reviewed the NDP, we found out that first thing that came up was there was no theory of change. The programmers here will relate with the fact that, with what I'm saying around the fact that, for every programmatic intervention, you need to have a strong theory of change that would say, if we do this, and we do this, and we do this, it will lead to this. So what we found out was the NDP, it had elements of women being represented at the National Assembly. It had elements around protecting the children and elements around social protection and so forth. But there was no comprehensive story that would say, if we take care of the policy and regulatory framework, we take care of the capacity building around this, we take care of the budgeting, we take care of this, we will get this. So that we know that we have a comprehensive approach, for gender equality. There was also this issue about the Constitution being silent as it relates to personal law, which is also critical, because the legal people can throw a right on it, but the conversation is that the personal law, it kind of skews and it mocks the whole issue around gender equality, if it's not addressed properly. So it needs to be looked at. We need to have a conversation around it. There's also the element of social protection that as portrayed as not being comprehensively addressed within the NDP gender strategic interventions. So in other words, what was found out is that social protection was addressed, generically, but social protection as it relates to women was not addressed. The civil service reform also, women representation at the managerial and technical levels is being portrayed as being suboptimal in terms of where we want to go with it. Unpaid labor. The NDP had a very interesting preamble where it showed unpaid labor, and it made some projections about its contribution to GDP. That unpaid labor contributes to GDP if it's costed. But what we found out in the NDP is that it does not analyze the issue and did not come up with strategies to address it. We know that there is a lot of, based on the reproductive roles that is assigned to women, we know there is a lot of unpaid labor issues, from taking care of children to taking care of the elderly, the sick, and so forth in the house. It's mainly the task of women, and it's not factored in the national accounts, and it's unpaid, and we don't have a conversation around it. And then there is the question about we increasing user fees, and so forth, which creates a more hostile environment. It puts the woman in a position to choose. Do I pursue my unpaid labor chores and exercises? Yes, what I'm trying to say is, all these increases, for example, from fuel and transportation, it will have an impact on their caregiving roles. They go to pick up the kids from school. Taxi fare is now increasing. They are forced to walk. There's road constructions. Water is cut off. They have to go and fetch water. There's a whole gamut of, and as I said, this is quite vast, and we do not propose to be the experts, but really it's catalytic. Let's look at it. The people who have the expertise, look at it, because it's a serious conversation to be held. Agriculture also, the agriculture strategy in the NDP, it touches on gender issues, but it does not have an associated plan or policy or activity to address the challenge. It didn't come up with that. Infrastructure, what we found out was that the gender benefits accrued from infrastructure and energy development, from all these new roads and, increased access to energy, are unintended, as far as the literature is concerned. Because yes, in interventions, there's always the issue of intended impact and unintended impact. And there is no evidence in the NDP to show that we're making all these considerable investments in roads to be able to support gender equality. Nor is the story the same story repeated around energy. Again, data for development. We have pockets of gender disaggregated data, but there is no policy. For example, policy, directive, and prescription that, hey, in all of your various sectors, law, it's mandatory that you make provisions for gender disaggregated data. So it's also there on the table. And the issue of contradictions. There's a lot of, I know there's been some conversations, I don't know whether it's still there, but even in terms of maternal mortality and so forth, there are contradictions. You know, you hear various approach to how we manage data for development. Same too is on the macroeconomy. We all talk about the macroeconomy, we talk about gaps as an impediment to growth and development. But what we found out that the issue of closing these gaps, and how it links to economic growth. Again, there's that absence of a theory of change around there. Clear linkages on how specific policies or programs will address the gaps are not there. The impact of policies or the persistence of these policy gaps on the economy also is not assessed. That should be a serious conversation we have, because if the one wing really is weak, and in our whole macroeconomic discussion, we do not, seriously address it and say, hey, this one wing that is weak, how is it impacting? What impact does it have on our vision for growth? Then there is really need for further conversations. The public finance management also, we found out that the major barriers to mainstreaming gender is around, insufficient knowledge. Again, as I said, gender is quite it's a very intricate and complex and critical area. I want to strongly believe that if we go around the room, we'll find evidence that NDP must feature strong policy commitments to gender disaggregated data. We're also putting on the table that government and other stakeholders must undertake both ex ante and ex post gender impact assessments, to generate credible data and information that will guide policy decisions going forward. Stakeholders, and including governments, must have increased training on mainstreaming and gender budgeting, as well as be provided with associated tools necessary for this type of work. There is need also to mainstream gender in the good governance strategy. There is also need for expenditures to be focused more on basic levels, and this relates to, and I hope I can shy away from a debate here, but what the evidence is showing is that
now cigarette is 50. Obviously, I will use 50% of what I'm getting to buy a cigarette to satisfy myself. So some of these policies really have direct impact, on gender. And if you talk about gender, it's not only women. It's across the board. It's how society perceives the rules of different sexes. And we know Gambia obviously is a patriarchal society, and this is deeply rooted. So some of these things, even unconsciously, we are not aware. Like, we do things, we think, yeah, we are doing it, but obviously there is a gap that should be filled. So how can we fill that gap? It's not that, okay, yeah, equality or equity for everyone. Yes, but over a period of time, men have been dominating. So if you say equity, before we close that gap, it will be difficult. So we must bring affirmative policies, affirmative laws to close the gap. So this is probably it's not done with a bad intention. Maybe government, even the NDP, they just do it, but without knowing that it has implications, on gender mainstreaming. So, Mr. Young, I think you and your team did a great job, and I think they deserve a round of applause. I'm very much impressed. I've never attended a very comprehensive interrogation on gender like this one. looking at the policies. We stop at the laws, the legislation, but like looking at the specific policies. I know even if you look at the education policy, it's not gender sensitive. If you look at maybe the agriculture policy, maybe it has, it's not gender sensitive.
We hold revenue in operations, and the 70 plus is going to programs.
Wow.
Which is good.
That's good.
Which is good.
That's
because most, even at international level, there's this 30-70 rule. Or 40-60, that you cannot spend 60% or 80% of your budget on operations, your travels, your vehicles, and spend the rest of it on programs that affect. But what we found out is that they specifically spend more on that, and the education too, in terms of programs. And an interesting thing that was also found out is we looked at the 5 regions, their strategic plans, and looked at the 5 councils, and looked at what they want to spend money on, and it's quite good. So it supports the decentralization agenda, because if you look at their financial their budgets for the 5-year period, they all cost around 80. There's some up to 99%.
Expand the initiative also. And most telling thing that I recognize but also is the presence of the DPS, who is also responsible for gender in one of the biggest spending ministry in country, and then for that matter, one of the most productive sector of the economy. And then, Madam Gassama, I would like for you to bring your thought in the discussion, and then maybe emphasize what are some of the steps your ministry is taking, and any other ministry, or like Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education also, in order to enrich the discussions also. But beside this data also, those to establish that these are facts, we are also independently working with the African Development Bank in order to see how gender and other social risk factors are being factored in our development programs. And then with our latest assessment, we found that the results are very aligned, very close. Women have difficulty in accessing input. Women have accessing information about projects, not only about projects, financial audit in fact, but the mechanisms that are responsible for delivering those projects are not known to women, much more the beneficiaries also. Then you will see that access to information, we are not talking about only to the public services also, or accountability in the public service, but even beyond the public service also. Then with that note, we thank Samba and the team who have been working with the last few months to get this thing right. And then also thank Lala, and then who has put a special interest in this, to do a final mop-up and then to align our findings with what the ideals of NDI is looking for. Lala and Saba, thank you, and then I thank everybody to be part of this.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Now we're going to do the engagement. The floor is open. You've heard Mr. Jallo, okay?
Really congratulating you. I think I would agree with him that since I started, attending these kinds of forums, I have never seen a document that is as comprehensive in terms of gender analysis as this one. You've really touched on the issues that is taking this country backwards. Gender responsive budgeting is something that we have been advocating for. But to be honest with you, I think we really lack the capacity to do gender responsive budgeting in this country. But seeing what you have done, I'm elated, and I'm convinced that we should be able to do it if we really collaborate, if we really consult each other and work together, both on the side of government and civil society. Coming to what you were saying about the ranking in terms of gender mainstreaming, my intervention, I'm sorry it would take a little presentation. I think I will thank you so much. I'm so excited to do this. about the weak policies that you talk about at the level of the Ministry of Gender, the policy being weak, the M&E frameworks not, they just names, they are not there. Right now, they don't even have a proper M&E framework because I just did an institutional analysis of that that ministry, and I know a lot of things that are there, and the research and all that. Well, what is important also is the institutional mechanism for gender mainstreaming. If we really want to succeed in gender responsive budgeting across the board, we must have that institutional mechanism for gender mainstreaming. The institutional mechanism for gender mainstreaming should start from the top. For example, in other countries who are very successful in gender mainstreaming, they have an interministerial gender committee. That interministerial gender committee you have down at the level of the ministers, at the level of the permanent secretaries, you have the technical gender committee, and you come down to the gender focal persons and all that. So if we have that institutional mechanism in place, we have the correct M&E mechanism in place, the correct coordination mechanism in place, it will be easier to institutionalize gender responsive budgeting. There is that one I think I would like to see in your document, but the issue of capacity gap at the level of the gender ministry is also it's a problem because the ministry is supposed to be coordinating and guiding other institutions, sensitizing other institutions, advocating for gender mainstream. So if the capacity is not there, I am supposed to be telling you do gender mainstreaming. I don't know what gender mainstreaming is or gender responsive budgeting is. I don't know how to do the gender analysis of the national budget. How can I advise you to do that? So that is important. Well, we all know funding is an issue for everybody. So when you come to public procurement, you also talked about women content lacking. But for me, what will that mean is like most of the time women businesses are not formalized. If you look at formalization is an issue with women's business. And if you are not formalized, your participation in public procurement will be limited. So I think encouraging women, because most of the women businesses are in the informal sector. So that's another thing. You already talked about the issue of data, which is a general problem across the board. And I was very excited when you talked about ICT. I think this is one area which Gambia should strengthen as much as possible, and we are happy that we now have a ministry responsible for that. I agree with you during the COVID, ICT brought us new opportunities, especially for women businesses. Most of our women are into cross-border trade, especially those in the value chain, agriculture value chain, crossing over to Senegal and the neighboring countries to, buy and sell goods. And there were a lot of risks attached to that cross-border trade. Women are exposed to a lot of risks. Sometimes they have to spend the night outside. Sometimes they are attacked, issues of gender-based violence, a lot of issues. And with the COVID, in as much as COVID, has negative impact on our economy, but it has opened an opportunity for women businesses because there were a lot of online businesses. So the risk of women being violated on the way, the risk of border officers taking advantage of women, the risk of women venturing into, how do you call this, the informal cross-border trade, all that through, this thing. The NDP, you talk about the theory of change, and that is really important. But our issue with the NDP, since the first NDP, was that gender was only seen as an enabler. That is why it wasn't comprehensive enough. And most of the time you do everything possible to explain this to people. In as much as we have gender mainstream across the board, we also need to have gender as a standalone pillar. You go to the MDGs, that is what is there. Gender has been mainstream across all the NDP goals, but as also we have NDP goal 5 as gender equality goal, the same as the SDGs. So these are issues that we really need to take into consideration. Social protection is the same as gender. It has been treated as the same as gender. Then another important thing that I took note of is the issue of you mentioning 42% of the NDP budget going to infrastructure. But how much of that goes to infrastructure that directly impacts on the lives of women? Sometimes some of these infrastructures that we create, the people that matter really are in the rural areas. Does this 42%, impact on their lives? Because we're talking about gender responsive budgeting. Doesn't mean a separate budget for men and women, but we ensure that men and women equally benefit from the budget. So if it goes to infrastructure, what type of infrastructure is it going to? Where are the women? Are they benefiting from that infrastructure? If it is this road, like this highway, okay, women will benefit. Well, how much are the farmers benefiting from this, the new coastal road? How do they OIC, yeah, this OIC
It's still on
thing. Yeah, a lot of money is being pumped into that. But how much goes to the roads that connects the women to the market? How much of this goes to garden infrastructures, provision of water for women, communication infrastructures for women to be able to sell their products? These are some of the issues we really need to look at this 42% and where it is going to. Then we will be able to know whether women are really benefiting. Public finance is also another issue. I don't know. When
have a limited understanding of what gender entails. But then coming to this workshop today and then being put through a comprehensive analysis of factors that have to be considered once policies are formulated, and then to ensure the impact on gender mainstreaming issues, do you understand, come out categorically clear. I think it's just something that I was not looking forward to, and we'll just have to say congratulations to you and the team for a job well done. But then overall, I think Madam DPS has spoken the minds of a good number of us in the audience. Thank you once again.
Your name again?
I'm from the NAO.
Okay, that's
interested in, and if Mr. Jallo can help us a bit to digest more into that, I'll be very much interested in that. Secondly, DPS talked about the issue of a good number of women businesses not being formalized. That's an issue, it's important. But one thing that we also fail to understand in this country is that there is a lot of biases when it comes to awarding of government contracts, especially to women-owned businesses. We have competent and credible women-led businesses in this country who have lamented in the past that have bidded for government contracts, but they were never supported. They were never given. And it has to start from our ministries, from our departments. Let's say, for instance, the Minister of Agriculture. How many metric tons of fertilizer and farm inputs in general do you bring into this country every year? How do we ensure that we mainstream gender in that as well? To ensure that it all don't goes to the men-controlled businesses, for instance. Sometimes we complain about capacity, we complain about the issue of institutions or businesses not formalized, but we need to support them. We need to strengthen them. For me, that's the only way forward. And lastly, and not the least, that I wanted to say is that it's often been said in this country that we have very good policies in the Gambia, we are good at making good laws, but implementation is the problem. We always say that in this country. So I don't know, Mr. Jallo, if you could also help us, apart from the recommendations and the weaknesses that you've spotted from the policies, what are some of the good provisions in these policies that need to be maintained, because we know some of these policies, like for instance the NDP, is currently being reviewed. So that, and some of us are part of the process that MS talked about. It's been very inclusive, that they're trying to involve everyone. So that when we know that these particular provisions definitely need to be further strengthened instead of removing them, we can advocate for that. Thank you very much.
Is to get data and information from the authorities. So we end up scouring, we call different ministries, we struggle to get that data, so we use international data. And certainly it's true. Maternal mortality is been on the decline according to the records. But when you look at international data sets, they are highlighting that that's not the case. So there's some discrepancies, and still the government is not forthcoming, which is a challenge. So we have issue of identifying the true impact of these policies when it comes to gender, because of the lack of forthcoming with data to be able to use that to assess. We on Gynaco are very data heavy. We do a lot of data checks. But overall, when it comes to maternal mortality, the target which the Gambia had was quite not ambitious, was not ambitious enough. Because as she said, this all also stems from the SDGs, and then countries are taking those and mainstreaming it in their countries. But when you compare some of our targets in the Gambia and some of the targets for the SDGs, we are far behind. So what does that mean? If the government puts a target, perhaps on maternal mortality, which is an example, a live example which we have seen, analyzed, and assessed. The target was achieved because what? Perhaps it wasn't ambitious enough. And this is something we need to think of. I'll pivot onto another point and then pass it over, which is about the Women's Enterprise Bill. This was a big amount of money. When it was being starting this, I was going around with a National Assembly member, Tumanjai. We went to the market. She was talking to the women there to inform them about this Women's Enterprise Bill, because it's very obvious what happens to these monies at times. When these monies come, instead of mainstreaming it in the right institutions so that it is not political, what ends up happening, and this was what she was trying to do, to ensure that that money wouldn't be politicized. But when you go and find out who are accessing those funds, and is it politicized or not, you see the realities, and it's unfortunate. But these are the things that shouldn't be happening. When we talk about gender mainstreaming, why are we politicizing it? So I think I just had to highlight some of these issues, which we are very much keen and interested on Gynaco, and also encourage the other media to do a little bit of follow these people, go to their offices, knock on their doors, sit outside, refuse to leave. Let them give you the data so you can analyze whether actually progress is being achieved or not. Thank you.
Incapacity, serious technical incapacity. Because government has looked at, they have taken gender according to the 3 principles of structural, processes, and practices. It's only structural that government has actually met, because you have the gender focal points in the ministries. And of course, we have our gender ministry. Last year, or 2017, when the new government came. Before, all gender programs were managed and administered by at the Vice President's office, and under the Women's Bureau, whose only mandate was to coordinate. Now, when it comes to practices, and those are the policies, we have very good policies. The processes, sorry. We have very good policies. The policies do not work because the policies are not linked with a strategy to implement it. And this is one key area that we lack. And it's not only the Ministry of Gender, but it cuts across. And I'm sure DPS will agree with me that this is a major challenge. Now the practices, the third principle, which is the practices, we all take into consideration our socio-cultural norms and beliefs. And this is where we fall short as a country, because gender is not seen as a technical, developmental issue to improve lives and livelihoods of people, but it is seen as a socio-cultural practices where patriarchy dominates in our discussion, in the way we do things, in the way we relate to each other as men and women. And unless and until we deconstruct all this, we will still have challenges to implement our policies and our and the programs that we run. And I think that is why when Mr. Jallow went to do this research, I'm not surprised that you came up with all these findings. And one recommendation that I can say, because DPS have spoken about most of the issues that I wanted to say, because I had issues on gender mainstreaming, the strategy. The strategy expired it was 2010 to 2020. And the strategy expired in 2016. I don't know whether it was renewed or not. And this is a policy that should have run up to 2020. I understand that it's been extended to 2023, but that paper is still not being shared, or maybe it's shared, but I don't have
explanation, as because when he was explaining, he mentioned about the Constitution and the personal law that he mentioned. The reference to that will be Section 7 of the 1997 Constitution, which talks about personal law, and that only concerns marriage, divorce, and inheritance. So apart from that, we think Section 17, 18, which talks about the fundamental human rights, give equality to both genders. And when it comes to the other laws like the Public Procurement Act, and when drafters are drafting, they use he or she to cater for both genders. So not necessarily giving specific reference to say this is what is gender sensitive. So the only act that deals with gender got to do with the Women's Act, and that is specific. That is what is specifically dealing with women. So the Women's Act should serve as the grand norm, or should I say the bedrock, for formulation of policies regarding women mainstreaming in our laws. Thank you so much.
The validation we require of what has been put on the table, and also the amendments and the recommendations that we need to advocate around. But then it's up to the group. I know there are some questions that had come up. It relates first to gender mainstreaming, the extent to which it was addressed, and problems around implementation. Well, honestly, I don't usually, I shy away from being prescriptive in sessions like this, but rather I say what I think, with the expectation and on the understanding that, you know, it will be value addition by everybody. Now, you know, gender mainstreaming, as I said in my discussion, is quite a very technical and complex issue. And when you look at what we have, it has what comes out really is, in a layman's term, if I want to say it, if I can put it this way, it's about how we walk the talk. Basically, in summary, it's about how we walk the talk. There's a lot of talk. There's a lot of talk. We put together our policies, we put together our legislative framework, we even make attempts around the regulatory framework. Although there's the issue of expired policy frames. Okay, but for me, having engaged with this whole process, I think in a nutshell, what I can say is we are talking a lot, but we are not walking the talk equally. That for me is the key. Now, in terms of how we can do better and address the problems around implementation, this is what I think. What I have seen is there are a lot of silos. There's a lot of silos and even tough guarding in all sectors. There is a lot of silos, and everybody is in your little corner and trying to get on with it. And implementation also becomes a problem, given the fact, and I think our colleague here said it quite well, and she will she definitely would do it better than I. I'll just remind you that usually, especially in the public sector, gender is one or two persons' business, and they just leave it to you to take care of. So there are problems around the at the institutional level, around the outlook and the approach at the institutional level to gender mainstreaming. It just reminds me of the history of planning. There were times when planning in this country, the planners were only thought necessary for budgeting. You know, they fast them when it's time to budget, they activate them as soon as this budget is done, they open the closet and they go back. And we have problems like that for gender also. They kind of, our colleague here is telling you they even call her gender. I mean, gender should be the chief executive officer of an institution should be the one they call gender. That person should ensure that, you know, everybody has an equal, is operating from an equal ground. So these are some of the challenges. There's element of silo mentality. There's element of poor coordination amongst all of us. Because sometimes, as I like to say, the solution to your problem lies in another sector, not necessarily your sector. So we've had this conversation around, you know, women and infrastructure. There are marketing problems, there are access to the products, the factors of production lie with other sectors, from trade to supporting them to be formalized, to element of reducing the number of operators who are unbanked, and all of those. So we need to be able to come together and take an integrated approach. And I think the absence of an integrated approach is also hindering implementation. So that's my little bit of wood to it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think Mr. Gallo did justice to his presentation. On that note, I think you deserve a round of applause. Thank you so much, Mr. Gallo.
Mr. Jallo, for that presentation, but also for guiding the conversation around the policies that were reviewed. But also to thank the DPS, Anti-Taboo, and our colleague from the National Audit Office and all the other people here who have added in input and given comments around the document and made recommendations. I'd just like to, we have looked at all these different policies, like Mr. Jallo rightly stated, and gave a presentation of. But we also like to have a more specific conversation around gender responsive budgeting. And this is one of the reasons why the Gambia's budget processes was one of the key issues that was reviewed and research was made on when we were coming up with the findings for this policy brief. And this is because we believe the allocation of state resources should take into consideration the priority issues for both men and women. And when budgets are made, the issues that affect women are also taken into consideration. This is not to say that there should be a separate budget strictly for women, but whatever budget the Ministry of Finance is putting together on behalf of the government is inclusive, and it takes into consideration the issues affecting the different sections of our society. This will ensure that the state is able to allocate its resources to different priority areas or different issues affecting women, men, boys and girls in our societies. Now we understand that this is not something that can be done by one stakeholder. In the document that we provided you with, you'll see that we did an analysis of best practices, and we cited specifically South Africa and Tanzania. And in Tanzania, the efforts to have gender-responsive budgeting was initiated by the civil society organizations. And today, it has one of the best processes when it comes to gender-responsive budgeting in the continent. That just goes to show the role that civil society organizations can play in promoting such reforms to happen. Just because we don't have it in Gambia right now shouldn't limit CSO efforts to promoting for this reform to happen. And like I said, it doesn't just take the Ministry of Gender to come up with internal mechanisms or institutional mechanisms to ensure that they come up with strategies and mechanisms to ensure that gender mainstreaming is done. But it takes efforts from different stakeholders, the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, who is responsible for introducing annual budgets to the Parliament when they are having their consultations, which is part of the processes in the planning stages of the annual budget. When they're having these consultations with the different line ministries and the MDAs, they're able to take into consideration the different priority issues as they relate to gender, but also to empower or build the capacity of the Gender Committee at the National Assembly, but also the Finance and Public Accounts Committee at the National Assembly. So in the review or parliamentary scrutiny processes of our annual budget, they're able to capture the issues of relevance to gender and gender-responsive budgeting. But also to work, we know when things go to the National Assembly, they need political will and commitment. So how do we also include it as a part of our advocacy strategy to include political actors in these conversations, because they have influence over what their National Assembly members approve of or what decisions they take in Parliament. So in our advocacy efforts as civil society organizations, how do we also ensure that we don't just limit it to the Ministry of Gender and Finance, but we also bring in other relevant actors such as political party leaders who are responsible for pushing for that political commitment to ensure that these things become a reality as opposed to just things CSOs are advocating for. But lastly, also how civil society organizations can increase public knowledge and public awareness about these issues. It's one thing to sit in these forums and talk about gender-responsive budgeting and what needs to be done better on behalf of the general public. It's another thing to have the public actually understand why this is important for them and also take up the responsibility at the grassroots level to have conversations with their elected representatives to prioritize these issues in Parliament. So these are just things that are included in this document for all of you to think around as you head into the group presentations and identify key areas that can be used for advocacy. Thank you.
My name is Lala Ture and I work with NDI. NDI is the National Democratic Institute for International Affairs, and I work with them as program officer. NDI is an international organization that is currently operating in different countries around the world, and we work to promote democracy and work together with government and CSOs in the different countries that we are in to advance democracy and democratic standards and principles. So in the Gambia, NDI has been here since 2020, and we've worked on a series of projects. We've done election observation with civil society organizations. We are currently supporting the Elections Watch Committee, and we also worked with the Commission on Political Debates, and we supported the implementation of the presidential debate ahead of the 2021 presidential elections. And we've also been working with government partners at the Office of the President and other institutions, including CSOs, through our Peers project. And what we do with this project is to promote open government reforms in the Gambia. So we work with Open Society Platform the Gambia to promote fiscal transparency, open governance, and citizens' participation in important government programs and activities. And all of these are geared towards ensuring that the Gambia, as a part of its transition to a more democratic dispensation, includes transparency and open governance reforms in its activities or programming. Right. So with the different stakeholders, we have different activities with different stakeholders. Like I mentioned before, we are working on with OSPG, the Open Society Platform, the Gambia. We're working with them to improve Gambia's ratings to become a member of the Open Government Partnership. But we're also working with different government stakeholders to promote fiscal transparency, which includes the Ministry of Finance and the National Audit Office. And we've also been supporting the communications efforts of some of these institutions that I've mentioned, and a series of other activities that we've also supported local partners to work on, all of which, like I said before, are geared towards open governance in the Gambia. So our programming is specific to the availability of funding, but it also based on what activities or programs that we have available in our country office at the moment. We've worked with media before, with the OSPG. Of course, we've done a training with the Gambia Press Union, and there's still room for improvement, there's still room for growth and partnership. And as we look to continue or build on the work that we've already done in the Gambia, we're looking forward to also opening our doors to other partners, which include the media. We understand the role, we recognize the role that the media plays in the consolidation of democracy, and the important role that they play in the work that we do. So the media remains to be one of our partners that have been included in all the activities that we've done so far, and will also be one of the partners we'll continue working with to conduct our activities in the Gambia.
Yeah, thanks a lot to have me on your TV also. My name is Abdullah Jadama. I'm the responsible for programs and grant at OSPG Gambia. Well, basically, OSPG has the acronym stand for its Open Society Platform Gambia. Basically, we work in the area of governance. When we say governance, we have a particular focus that is directed towards the, accountability and transparency. When we say accountability, then that means that we want to ensure that the public resources are utilized in the interest of the Gambian people, and then working on the mechanisms with the stakeholders to see that we hold government to account also. And then the transparency component of it, that is looking at how the mechanisms that can give us systems that can ensure that everything that is done is open to the Gambian people, and then they are part of the process also. Yeah, thanks a lot. With regards to our work also, in terms of accountability and transparency, the findings that we have done, like we take a particular reference to this particular program, which we work with our partners to find out to review the few national policies, not all of the national policies, or the policies that gear towards enhancing transparency also. One is that is the National Development Plan. We work with our partners, and then there was a review that we conducted, and that in that review we found that there are a lot of challenges and gaps in that. Then one key area, particularly we focused on this particular program, that is we are looking from the gender perspective. But we found that there is no theory of change. When you say theory of change, this is the relationship that works to see that if you do X and Y, then it can give you a result also. But for National Development Plan, we found that there is a gender component, there are gender issues there, but there is no linkages created between them to ensure that the input and the output will demonstrate an outcome also. Then beside that too, and we also found that when we come in terms of data also, the data are not specifically disaggregated as they're supposed to be. With that, it is difficult to have a specific data that is claiming that this is what we have been contributing towards gender also. Then the other specific that we look at is the Procurement Act. And then, as we already said in the morning, the finding shows that there are specific women enterprise definitions are not mentioned in the law. And in secondly, there is nothing that is stated about the quotas that can be allocated to women businesses for them to be able to do businesses also. And there are a series of issues that, as I said, are found in this review also. Then when you come into the national budget itself, there's no gender-specific code that can indicate that this particular spending on vegetable gardens or maternal health have a code that if you put in there, that can indicate that $1 million, $2 million, $3 million has been spent specifically directed to women and girls also. Then with regards to which is the other one, the Financial Act. The Financial Act, the same thing, and then because this is the biggest tool that the government use in order to do institute the budget and any other financial management system, that also then there is no area that mentions specifically about gender-specific statement about in the budget also. Then there are a plethora of issues that has been identified, and then that's why we brought these people together here to review and validate that document, and hence we will start to engage the respective stakeholders in order to address those challenges, in order to bring women to their rightful position in the society in the Gambia. Yeah, brilliant. I think that is the way forward, because we cannot do this thing with a group of men also. And then it's already been in discussion in the corridors of the meeting that we need to come out with a hybrid team. When I say hybrid, this means that men and female also coming together, especially people who met here, and then in order to form a team and to engage the stakeholders also, because that is the bedrock of our initiative. People have to be participative in the process. In that, you cannot leave the women outside of that process. Then that remains to be part of the core of what we will be doing in the few weeks and months ahead, to see that we bring women stakeholders from the respective ministries and agencies and CSOs to engage the government stakeholders and the relevant institutions. Yeah, well, our main step is what we have been doing the last 2 years was to popularize and then educate the public about the anti-corruption bill, because that is the biggest instrument that we have in order to fight corruption. And then thank goodness we have done a great job together with our partners and other development partners, and then including CSOs who have been working in this space to see that this goes to the National Assembly and been enacted. We have been engaging communities in CRR North and then Mansakongo Area Council area, that is in Jara and the Chians, together with their national assemblies, and then to educate them to see that this bill move in the National Assembly. Thank goodness we achieved that one. The bill went up to the last reading stage, but however, then it's stuck there. And then what we understood, whether it's right or wrong, is that this bill have to be restarted again, because National Assembly does not inherit a bill also. Then the other stuff that we do is that this type of issues that we are doing also, then try to analyze policies, to identify issues out of that policy, and then to engage the relevant stakeholders who matters in the process, so that there could be policy change in order to see that the people are included, and then when they are included, they will be participating, and then they will know exactly what is happening, and then they will be able to hold the public official to account. Thank you for having me. Thanks a lot.